The stories that you know in this universe can be completely different in another. All it takes is a minor change to one single canon event to flip an entire story on its side. You might be familiar with the entirety of the storyline from Splatoon 1 to 3, and you might also know that humans are extinct in this world. But that's the story we know in this current universe. This is What If.
Hello, fellow civilians. The world is at war, and we need you to fight on the front line. Wait a second. I'm getting reports now that a nuclear warhead just struck the polar ice caps of Antarctica. This is madness. It seems like nature is against us as well. Volcanoes are erupting, meteorites are smacking the globe, and giant tidal waves are rising with the sea levels. The world is doomed. I repeat, the world is doomed. Take shelter immediately. Do whatever you can to survive. We will make it. Well, unfortunately, this looks like the end. For me, and for a lot of you out there. May God protect you on your last endeavors, and survive if you can. Damon Alfonsino, signing out.
Hello there, my name is Landon from the Squid Research Lab. Odds are you are familiar with all the events from Splatoon 1, 2, and 3, and I'm not here to bore you with all the details, cause you already lived it, but in your universe. Yes, you heard that right, there's multiple universes, and in fact, your universe is Earth 1218. Our universe here is Earth 7831. And believe it or not, our Earth wasn't so different than yours. The events unfolded pretty much the same way. You still had Agent 3 taking on DJ Octavio and the Octarian army. Also had Agent 4 doing the same thing, defeating DJ Octavio a second time and taking out his army. You had Agent 8 teaming up with Captain Cuttlefish to take out Commander Tartar and his army of sanitized Octarians, but for some reason, our Sea Cucumber was actually working with Commander Tartar. He was evil. That got messy. So yeah, pretty much everything was the same with both of our Earths, even with the giant Mr. Grizz and Huge Fry's space battle. I mean, I still can't believe that happened. So what is it that makes our story different than yours? Well, we kind of have to go back in time for that, because one small difference made a whole change in the timeline. Now, the Great War and Apocalypse around the globe definitely still happened. That did not change at all. And a good chunk of the population still took refuge inside the dormant volcano. Of course, the giant crater would be their last resort to life. As you may already know, they created the world of Alterna, and it wasn't long after that before they ended up destroying the world of Alterna. And everyone died, the end. No, you can't just end the story right there, Landon. Professor, frankly, I wasn't just going to end it there. I mean, obviously I was going to talk about the—
Nope, I'm taking over because this part is very, very interesting.
Take it away, frankly.
Okay, so you might recall a very strange professor like myself who actually created a cat named Judd. Judd is meant to be last member on Earth that was until Balefall from Sky.
I mean, it's not like he just dropped from space. He was in the Arc Polaris.
Also known as Balefall from Sky. In order to preserve the cat, the scientists actually decided to put him in cryo chamber bed in order to keep him alive all these years. But what makes this story different from the story that you're used to is that this scientist actually decided to go a step further. Instead of only making one cryo bed, he decided to make two cryo beds, one for Judd the cat and one for a human volunteer to carry on the human race. And unfortunately for the Inklings and Octolings in the future, he still made Commander Tartar as a AI to carry on human knowledge as a failsafe. Which is why we're on the topic of Commander Tartar is as one fine piece of AI myself. I love the circuitry and the data banks that it has.
Professor. Huh? The cryo beds?
Oh, that's right. With two cryo beds, one goes to Judd and one goes to a lucky human. But the professor never did tell anybody about the second bed. Instead, it was going to be up to him as he thought it would cause mass panic. The end of the world happened faster than he ever could have imagined. And unfortunately, he did not have time to run a poll for the cryo chamber spot. So during the mass panic and people running to and fro, he noticed something on his way back to the cryo lab. It was less of a something, Professor, frankly. It was more of a someone. And this special someone would have a seat into the future. And a special future it definitely is. The new Agent 3 had saved the day and the entire planet from the evil clutches of Mr. Grizz. However, they decided to make a return back to Alterna to see if they could find anything from history's past. As the new Agent 3 was getting ready to wrap up and head back home, they heard a sound. The Inklings stopped immediately and turned around and saw a long corridor with a door at the end that seemed to be blocked by a couple of boxes. And as they approached the door, the noise got louder and louder, and it seemed to be crying of some sort. When the Inkling walked into the room, it seemed to be some type of old lab, and in the middle of the room was a single cryo chamber, and you wouldn't believe what was there. It was a human, and not just any human, a human baby. It seemed as if his cryo chamber had just recently failed, and that the baby was crying due to the fact that he was now awake, but Agent 3 caught him at the right time. And the new Agent 3 takes the baby human boy back to his friends to find out more about him. Everyone is just completely shocked to see new Agent 3 walk in with a human baby in their arms. Yeah, this was definitely not expected. It seemed like that special encounter that scientist had before running back to the lab was a lost baby that was separated from its family, and he decided to keep the baby alive by putting him in the cryo chamber instead of himself. Almost everybody was more curious and worried if anything, but Callie seemed to take a liking to the little boy. In fact, it was her idea to help raise it in the ways of the Inklings and Octolings in Splatsville. Marie never really had a problem with it, but she took more of the side of caution, as she was still worried about what's going on with this baby that just appeared out of nowhere. The OG Agent 3 couldn't care less. You can't blame them though, they've been through a lot. But the Inklings and Octolings overall took the kid in as if it was their own, like everyone shipped together in order to be the parents of this one individual child. And they would teach the child everything about their ways, about the Inkling life, the Octarian life, their fashion, their turf wars, and even the history and battles of human past and their past. And pretty much everyone loved this human child, and actually they looked upon him as a very important historical figure because he is technically the last human being alive on Earth. They would eventually give him the name Squawkto. He was neither squid or octopus, but at the same time, he was both of them because he was raised by both of them. The kid enjoyed being around all types of marine life and thought it was pretty cool and learning about his and everyone else's past, but still something was wrong. He wanted to play the games like the squids could play and the octolings and wanted to be just like them, but he was a human. He couldn't possibly turn into a squid or an octopus and swim through ink. He also very quickly grew out of the same gear and outfits of every Inkling and Octoling. He was just different. But he had to accept that this might be his family, but it wasn't who he was, and he just didn't feel like he fit in. Of course, he had things that he could do that no one else could, for instance swimming in water, but no one could do it with him. He would just do it alone because obviously it would kill the Inklings or the Octolings. But even though the child loved to go out on a swim, he never realized that one day it could mean some dangerous territory. Because one day he swam a little too far and ended up in salmonid territory, where one salmonid actually ended up snatching him. Squawkto actually becomes really good friends with the salmonid because he's kind of like them. He's different, and also the fact that he can swim in water and so can they. But he ends up telling them how it's not the Octos and the Squid's faults for what's been happening to them. And he tells them that it was the cause of a giant bear named Mr. Grizz and that they have defeated him, so this should go on no longer. Doing this, Squawkto actually was able to make peace of all creatures, squid, octo, and salmonid alike. He's seen as a peacemaker and looked at as sort of the new world leader. The kid grows up loving his new role, but he just wants to be a kid. But he still longed to be a kid like his Inkling and Octoling brothers and sisters. He still just didn't fit in. No matter how many different hairstyles or outfits he tried on, he just would never be one of them. But one day he had enough. Knowing his great powers of swimming, he decided to swim as far as he possibly could. Squawkto swam as far as he possibly could and noticed some wreckage far off in the water. It was the site of the NILS statue that had been broken down many years ago. He had been told that it's off limits from everyone, but curiosity got the best of him and he climbed inside anyways. The boy finds tons of destroyed computer monitors, but underneath some rubble, he finds a broken telephone. He immediately notices what it looks like from the history that he has learned of Commander Tartar, so he knows that he's the only last connection of the past humans.
so he stuffs Commander Tartar in his book bag and takes it back home with him. Once back into his home, he locks his door and begins to reconstruct Commander Tartar, but just enough only to allow him to speak. Tartar is now revived, well, sort of, but he is shocked out of his mind to see a human being alive today? He mumbles the professor would be proud before short-circuiting for good. The child is kind of confused by this statement and decides to do more research on this supposed professor, but he knows he can only get more answers if he heads from where Tartar came from, and that being the Deep Sea Metro. And he finds the Kamabo Corporation facility that was ran under Commander Tartar and finds his office. He notices that the main control office is locked, and the only way in is through a control terminal below him that actually is calling for a handprint. The boy scans his hand and it actually works. This gives him access to all the control terminals and all the computer monitoring systems in the entire office. There he's able to search the database and find data on absolutely everything surrounding the humans and their history, and even more than what the squids and octopi actually knew for themselves. He learns so much new information and finds a file codenamed The Final Day, and unfortunately he's unable to open it. All the data to that file is backed up in Alterna, so the boy heads to Alterna with hope of finding some new information about his past. Once there, he's looking around everywhere for some type of terminal or access point or some type of office with data, and he finally finds a sealed door with once again a hand scanner. The door swings open, and of course more monitors and more data backed up in computers, and he finds something that he never thought he'd find in a million years: the information and files for all the other surrounding bunkers across the globe. However, most of them were X'd out as there was no vitals being sent from those locations. However, there still were locations showing vital signs. He's absolutely stunned and speechless to potentially be able to find even more like his kind. So he sets off on a giant recruiting mission to go save and find every last bunker that's active and the humans that could be down there. And he takes a couple of his good buddies with him as well. So he spends the next couple of months and really the rest of the entire year trying to search for vital life signs or humans that could still be alive. I mean, even the locations that don't have vital signs coming from them, he still wanted to check, but lots of them just had skeletal remains from the humans. He finally approaches one that has active vital status coming from it, and he notices that the underground hatch is completely buried by tons of debris, very similar to how Alterna's was. Thanks to DJ Octavio and lots of his Octobots, they were able to move the debris out the way and open up the hatch. And once the bunker opens, out come tons of humans. Human survivors that have been down there for years. Entire generations have passed since these humans have been down here. Populations had almost quadrupled in each bunker, and they were ecstatic to be let free. Squawkdo could not believe his eyes and what he was able to achieve with his friends. He had single-handedly saved a once lost human race and brought them from the depths of the ground. Thousands upon thousands of humans made it out of these bunkers, all thanks to Squawkdo. He had become the most important person and most important being on the entire globe. The one that brought all marine life together, and now the one that saved and brought together the entire human race that survived so many years ago. But this is where young Squawkdo will learn curiosity can also ultimately lead to destruction. The humans met up with the new apex species of the world, the marine life, and they were astonished by what they saw. They shared so much information together and helped both groups grow. And for a while, they would thrive together, coexisting before creating their very own human city. But not every human loved this new coexistence. And there was also a major problem. The Great Turf War that happened so many years ago happened for a reason, because of the lack of land. Now with there finally being just enough for the Inklings and Octolings, it makes life a lot harder now, considering the fact that thousands upon thousands of humans now roam the earth once again as well. Now, even though Squawkdo did save the human race, of course, there were still human leaders and politicians that would take over for the humans and be the spokespersons for them. Lots of the humans believed that the world now belonged to the marine life. Some believed that there were other alternatives, such as going back into the bunkers or making even more bunkers, or taking over the land that the Octarians once had underneath the ground. But a lot of humans also believed that the marine life should be the ones to live underneath the ground, and that the humans should be able to be above ground, the way things always were in the past. The humans would also argue it was because of them that Inklings and Octolings and other sea life was able to evolve, and that once peaceful coexistence slowly turned into a bitter rivalry, where the humans started to despise the sea creatures and saw them as nothing but mere savages that had taken over their land. So the humans urged the sea creatures to make their way back into the sea so that they could have more land to live on. But the creatures told them back in response that it's just not possible anymore, and that if they would go into the water, that they would die. Their genes have completely changed now. The humans were so persistent, they even threatened to wage war on the sea creatures if they did not abide by the rules that they were given. And young Squawkto really didn't have much say-so, as he was quickly overruled by the older peers. But with tensions high and danger present around every corner of every day, one morning the entire world would change forever. One last time. The humans were persistent in starting a war against the sea creatures, but realized quickly that they had no type of real firepower or ammo with them outside of fuel and rocket parts. But with those scraps, they would construct a rocket with enough fuel to completely obliterate the infrastructure of Inkopolis. This gigantic rocket would be used as a last resort option, so smaller ones were made instead that would do just enough damage to get their point across. But the lack of ammo would prove to not be a worrisome problem, as they realized that the Inklings and Octolings and other sea creatures could not go in water, and in fact, water was their main weakness, so they would use just that against them. They began harvesting as much seawater as they possibly could, and did extensive research on the weapons that the Inklings and Octolings used in their turf war battles, and they pretty much remade their weapons, but to fire water instead of ink. They constructed water balloons, water sprinklers, and even water grenades, not to mention very high-powered shooting water guns very similar to that of the splat guns. With their scrap-made rockets and their water gun arsenal, they were truly a threat to be against. Squawkto was left out of the plans for everything, as they didn't trust him as he was good friends with the sea creatures, but he was watching from the background and noticed something seemed off when he saw them harvesting so much salt water, so he prepared by telling the Inklings and Octolings in advance. But even the warning to the sea creatures wasn't enough to prepare them for what was about to happen the next morning when the sun would rise. As soon as first light in the morning, the humans launched their attack by launching rockets into the heart of Inkopolis. Thankfully, the Inklings and Octolings were prepared and had gathered their armies and were ready to fight. Inklings, Octolings, Salmonid, and all sea creatures alike were working together to take out the human forces. The humans and their water guns seemed to prove very victorious amongst the Inklings and Octolings, but when it came to the Salmonid, the weapons didn't work so much. Not to mention the Octarians and their Octobot army was also a major threat that was starting to wipe out lots of the humans. So the humans were left to use poisonous gas on the Salmonid and the Octobots, which would also prove harmful to some of their own army. The true war hero turned out to be DJ Octavio and his Octobot King Mech. It dealt a lot of damage to lots of the infrastructure of the humans. Without him, they would have easily been wiped out a lot quicker. Both sides took major losses in the battle, and all Squawkto could do is watch and feel the guilt of setting free the humans in the first place. Squawkto simply just did what he felt was right. What anyone would do in that situation, saving his very own race. But the implications of what he did would haunt him, and it would only get worse. In fact, so much worse, he was not prepared for what would happen next. With the sea creatures getting an edge up on victory, there were tons of human casualties, so much so they were losing numbers in great multitudes. So the general had one last plan up his sleeve. It was the rocket that they had constructed earlier. The rocket was not just any rocket, however. It also was a nuke, one of the last nukes on Earth. and it had been produced and worked on from Commander Tartar's factory. Squawkdo quickly made his way to the factory to see if there was any shot that he could delay the launch, and inevitably shut it down for good. As he approached the lab, he decided to scan his hand, and amazingly enough, the doors open once again. Still confused, he runs into the lab in order to configure the settings to the launch, and a loud bang ripples through the air of the factory and lands shortly behind the boy. Squawkdo turns around and finds the general staring right at him. The general had with him one of the last pistols on Earth, having only 3 bullets in the chamber, 2 after his warning shot. He called the boy a traitor and could not believe that he was here trying to help them in this last-ditch effort to reclaim the Earth. He tells Squawkdo to step down, and that he must do what needs to be done for the sake of the human race, and if he doesn't step down, then he will fire. Squawkdo looks at him with a stern face and claims, "I've already done enough damage to everybody here on Earth. It's time to end this," and rushes the general. Right before the general could take a shot, a splat bomb rolls into the room and detonates right beside him, knocking him down on the floor and the gun flying away from his hand. The new Agent 3 had come in to save the day, but unfortunately, as the new Agent 3 was rushing the general for one last shot, the general reaches for his gun, turns around, and fires. With the splat bomb's explosion, the entire ink from the bomb detonated all over the controls in the lab and caused the rocket to fire after a short circuit. Squawkdo frantically runs after the general on the ground and takes his gun from him and holds him at gunpoint. The boy pointing the gun at the general nervously shakes as he slowly looks over at his friend Agent 3 and notices his body laying lifeless on the floor. His gun, nervously shaking in his hand, immediately turns into a fierce grip as he closes his eyes and pulls the trigger, shooting the general dead. Squawkdo runs over to Agent 3, and Agent 3 rolls over in his last breath and says, "I'm the one that found you. It's only right that I'm the one to save you," and then passes away. The boy sits in the middle of the lab, knowing that there's nothing left for him to do. The rocket had been detonated, and before long, the explosion hit. And the explosion was massive, shaking and rumbling of the lab, and the lights flicker on and off until eventually shutting down for good. Squawkdo quickly wipes his tears over Agent 3 and finds a radiation suit nearby in the lab, and makes a beeline for the outside world. And once he reaches it, he cannot believe what he sees. It was a wasteland. Truly every living thing had been destroyed in the area from the blast. Sea creatures and humans were both gone. The boy dropped to his knees and wept in disbelief. The new world that he was raised up in was destroyed, and because of him. And thanks to the recency of the blast, the air was still seeping into his suit. The toxic air was killing Squawkdo, slowly and steadily. It was only a matter of time until he joined everyone else in the dirt. The boy sat there aimlessly and tried to figure out what his next move would be. The nuke had killed off everything, land and sea, even in the sea. As fish started to bubble up and rise to the surface of the water, the nuke completely ruined everything that was. With the little time left that he has, he heads to Alterna once more to try to find a last-minute solution. Thankfully, one of the computers were still active, so he immediately gets to work and starts researching every single file in the system, until he finds one named The Professor's Wish. He clicks it and a video opens of the professor. The professor states how his only goal now is to save and preserve anything related to human life in hopes that it is passed on to the next life, but also states how humans were also the reason for their own downfall, and that life must move on and life must continue to flourish, whether it's human life or another. And shortly before the video cuts out, he leans into the camera and says this: "Grandson, I hope you can carry that knowledge as well, and I hope you can find a way to restore what we once had." And the feed cuts out. It's true. Squawkdo was actually the grandson of the professor. In fact, the baby that was left beside the professor was left on purpose from the parents of the child, as they knew he'd be in great hands from his grandfather, the professor, and as it turned out, he was. Squawkdo was in complete disbelief and cried tears of happiness and sorrow, but then realized that time was short for him and he had to make the most of it. He had to finish what his grandfather had started. The first thing he needed to do was preserve everything left of human knowledge, everything that he's experienced and everything that his forefathers had experienced as well, and kept it all on a single hard drive. But this time, it wasn't just for human knowledge to be passed on, but for the knowledge of the friends that he's met, the squids, the octos, and everyone else from the sea. And he quickly starts to research the information about the liquid crystals and how they actually help to evolve sea life in the first place. So he quickly gathers any pieces of the monitor crystals that are still on the surface of Alterna, as there were still lots covering the area from the falling debris. There were still so many crystals layering the walls and the ceiling of the dome, and there were so many in fact it could completely help to jumpstart wildlife again in the area. With only a couple of minutes left in his suit, he decides to do the last thing that he possibly can. He leaves and gathers the last rockets and explosives that he could possibly find and piles them up in the middle of Alterna. The goal was to create an explosion so big that it would blow all the crystallized screens from the walls and the ceilings up out of the hole underground, coating the ground above, and hopefully spread across the land. This was his last couple of seconds, or should I say, my last couple of seconds. This is Squawkdo, and my final voice recording before the end of everything that I loved. I took a risk and gambled something that I never thought would happen. Just freeing my own human race led to the end of everything that I known and loved. But I will never forget the time and memories I've spent with those that truly did care about me. I'm glad I was able to share my story with you today. Never take your friends and family for granted, no matter who they are and no matter who you are in comparison. May life flourish here on planet Earth. This is Squawkdo, signing out. Stay fresh. Young Squawkdo's plan would actually work. All the liquid crystals would be blown above ground, and the wind and weather would blow them across the terrain, miles and miles away. This time, these crystals weren't just reaching the ocean. They reached every part of the land that was still available on Earth. And thanks to the crystals, new and extremely wild creatures grew and inhabited the Earth. In a way, Squawkdo was able to heal the Earth. And thanks to him, he would forever change the trajectory of the planet. Absolutely fascinating. In this universe, it seems Squawkdo was the reason why we got the Pikmin. Exactly. The crystals were able to transform the entire landscape and existing creatures and even making new ones in the process. This was a very sad story, but at least it had a good ending. Well, at least good enough. At least the Earth does have life in this universe once again. But this was the Squid Research Lab, and thank you guys for tuning in today. Well, technically, we are the Pikmin Research Lab now. I guess that's true. But remember to always stay fresh. And never forget to ponder the question, what if?